Have you ever discovered that the person you trusted most could erase a lifetime of memories with a single careless decision? What if the last piece of your late spouse was treated like nothing more than spare cash? And what if losing that treasured keepsake wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a truth that had been hidden for decades? My name is Thomas. I'm 74 years old, and until that phone call from the pawn shop, I believed I already knew every secret my late wife had ever kept from me. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. If someone you loved more than your own life left behind one final gift, would you recognize its value before it was too late? I didn't, and neither did my daughter. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 6 years ago after 48 years of marriage. People often say time heals everything, but those people have never watched the love of their life slowly disappear while holding their hand and pretending to be brave. When Eleanor died, the house became painfully quiet. Every room echoed with memories that only I could hear. Friends encouraged me to move on. My neighbors invited me out more often, and even my daughter, Melissa, insisted I should stop living in the past. But there are some chapters of life you don't close simply because someone tells you it's time. Among all the things Eleanor left behind, one mattered more than everything else combined. It wasn't our wedding album. It wasn't the old letters we exchanged while I served overseas. It wasn't even the ring she wore for nearly half a century. It was a delicate gold necklace with a small, heart-shaped medallion that never left her neck. She wore it on ordinary mornings, family holidays, anniversaries, and even during her final days in the hospital. More than once, I asked what was inside the little pendant, and every time she'd smile, tap it gently with her finger, and say, "One day, when the time is right, it'll tell its own story." I assumed she meant it held an old photograph, or perhaps a lock of hair from someone she loved. I never tried to force it open. It belonged to her, and respecting her wishes felt like respecting her. After she passed, I placed the necklace inside a small velvet box in the top drawer of my bedroom dresser. Every Sunday morning, I take it out for a few minutes, hold it in my hand, remember the woman who made my ordinary life extraordinary, and then carefully put it back. It wasn't about the necklace itself. It was the closest thing I had left to holding Eleanor's hand. Melissa never understood that. Over the years, she'd become impatient whenever I refused to sell old family belongings. She often called them clutter and reminded me that antiques were worth money. "Dad," she'd say, "memories don't pay bills." I always answered the same way. Some things aren't measured by what someone is willing to pay. One quiet Tuesday morning, I opened the dresser to continue my little ritual, and the velvet box was gone. At first, I convinced myself I'd simply misplaced it, but as I searched every drawer, every shelf, and every corner of the house, a feeling settled over me that I couldn't explain. It wasn't panic. It was something colder, something that whispered this wasn't an accident. When Melissa stopped by that afternoon, I asked a question I never imagined I'd have to ask my own daughter. "Eleanor's necklace, have you seen it?" Her answer would change everything. Melissa didn't hesitate. She didn't look surprised by my question, and she certainly didn't look guilty. She set her designer handbag on the kitchen counter, crossed her arms, and let out a sigh as though I were asking about an old coffee mug instead of the last piece of my wife's life. "Yes," she said, "I know where it is." For one brief moment, relief washed over me. I thought perhaps she'd moved it while helping me clean, or tucked it away somewhere safer. But then she shrugged and added, "I sold it." The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air between us, too unbelievable to make sense. "You, ... What?" I whispered. "I sold it, Dad," she repeated, this time with a hint of impatience. I needed the money. Emily and I booked a vacation to the Bahamas, and I was a little short. That necklace was just sitting in a drawer collecting dust. Just sitting in a drawer. I stared at her. wondering if I was looking at my daughter or a stranger wearing her face. "That necklace belonged to your mother," I said, my voice barely steady. "She wore it every single day." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Mom's gone. She doesn't need it anymore. You can't spend the rest of your life worshiping old things." The sentence hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the necklace. It was about everything Eleanor and I had built together. 48 years of love had been reduced to something disposable because it couldn't be turned into a plane ticket and a beachfront hotel. "How much?" I asked quietly. "What? How much did you sell it for?" "I don't know. Maybe $400. 400. I almost laughed. The necklace alone was worth far more than that, but its true value had never been measured in dollars. Melissa had traded a lifetime of memories for a few days under the sun. "Which pawn shop?" asked. She hesitated for the first time. "Why does it matter?" she replied. "Because I'm getting it back." She frowned. "Dad, don't embarrass yourself. It's probably already been sold. I ask you a question." Finally, she scribbled the shop's name and address on a notepad. "Don't waste your money," she muttered. "It's just jewelry." After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen for several minutes, staring at the slip of paper. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from heartbreak. I kept hearing Eleanor's voice in my mind. "One day, when the time is right, it'll tell its own story." For the first time in years, those words felt different. I picked up the phone and dialed the pawn shop. A polite man answered, and after I explained who I was, he asked me to hold while he checked their records. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then he came back on the line, but his voice had changed. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, "the necklace is still here, but before you come in, there's something you need to know." My heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" I asked. There was another long pause before he spoke again. "Sir, you aren't going to believe what we found when the medallion on that pendant accidentally opened." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My fingers tightened around the phone so hard they began to ache. The room felt strangely silent, as if even the ticking clock on the wall had stopped to hear the answer. "What do you mean?" "It opened," I finally asked. The pawnshop owner cleared his throat. "We were inspecting the necklace to verify its condition. The hinge on the heart-shaped medallion was old, and when my employee polished it, it popped open. We didn't force it, I promise. But once it did," he paused again, "we found something inside that didn't look like jewelry." My pulse quickened. "What was it?" "I'd rather show you in person, sir. I don't think this is the kind of conversation to have over the phone." Within 20 minutes, I was pulling into the small pawn shop on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, just a modest storefront with faded signs and a bell that chimed when. I pushed the door open. Behind the counter stood a gray-haired man wearing reading glasses. The moment he saw me, his expression softened. "Mr. Bennett." I nodded. "I'm Carl. Thank you for coming." Without another word, he disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a small velvet tray. Resting in the center was Eleanor's necklace. The sight of it nearly brought me to tears. I reached out carefully, almost afraid to touch it, as though it might disappear again. The gold was exactly as I remembered, slightly worn from decades of being close to Eleanor's heart. But now the tiny heart-shaped medallion was open. Inside wasn't a photograph. It wasn't a lock of hair. Folded with impossible precision was a tiny piece of yellowed paper, no larger than a postage stamp. Carl handed me a pair of tweezers. "It looked fragile," he said quietly. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The handwriting stole my breath before I even read the words. It was Eleanor's. Every curve of every letter was unmistakable. The note began simply, "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, then life has unfolded exactly as I feared it might." My vision blurred with tears. She had written this long before she became sick, long before she knew she was dying. I forced myself to continue. "If this necklace reached you the way I hoped, then someone opened it because they valued love. But if it reached you because it was sold, stolen, or treated as something worth only money, then I'm sorry. That means the person who carried it forgot what truly matters. A lump formed in my throat. She knew. She had actually imagined that one day someone might betray the memory attached to this necklace. There was one final line. Beneath the folded paper is a tiny key. It belongs to safety deposit box 214. You'll know what to do when you see what's waiting there. Trust no one until you've opened it yourself. Carefully lifting the note, I saw it. A tiny brass key, no bigger than my thumb, taped beneath the paper exactly where Eleanor had said it would be. Carl looked at me with genuine sympathy. We didn't read past the first line, he said. Once we realized it was personal, we stopped immediately and called you. I thanked him, paid for the necklace without arguing over the price, and slipped it safely into my jacket pocket. As I walked back to my car, one question echoed louder than any other. What could Eleanor have hidden in that safety deposit box that she trusted more than her own family? And why had she warned me not to trust anyone until I saw it with my own eyes? I barely slept that night. The necklace rested on my bedside table, exactly where Eleanor had always placed it before going to bed. Every time I looked at it, I heard her words again. Trust no one until you've opened it yourself. Those weren't the words of a frightened woman. They were the words of someone who had seen something coming long before anyone else did. The next morning, I drove to the bank listed in her note. It was one we'd used years ago before switching to a branch closer to home. The building hadn't changed much. The marble floors, the polished brass railings, even the faint scent of old paper and furniture. Polish brought back memories of standing there beside Eleanor decades earlier. At the reception desk, I explained that I believed my late wife had left me access to a safety deposit box. The manager listened carefully, examined the tiny brass key, and disappeared into an office. A few minutes later, she returned, carrying a thin file. Mr. Bennett, she said gently, your wife made very specific arrangements. She instructed us that if anyone ever presented this key along with identification, the contents were to be released only to you, only to me, not our daughter, not any relative, just me. She led me into the vault, unlocked a long metal drawer marked 214, and quietly left me alone. The box wasn't filled with gold or stacks of cash. Instead, it contained a neatly organized collection of envelopes, a leather journal, a small flash drive, and one larger envelope with my name written across the front in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. My beloved Thomas, it began. If you're reading this, then the necklace has fulfilled its purpose. I prayed you would find this because you deserved the truth, even if it arrived years after I was gone. I took a deep breath and kept reading. During the last years of my illness, I noticed something that broke my heart. Melissa slowly stopped visiting because she wanted to spend time with me. She visited because she wanted to know what we owned. She asked about our savings, the house, your retirement, and my jewelry, far more often than she asked how I was feeling. I hoped I was mistaken. I prayed I was wrong. I closed my eyes. I remembered those conversations now. At the time, I dismissed them as harmless curiosity. Eleanor had seen something I refused to believe. The letter continued. I never wanted to judge our daughter too harshly. People can lose their way without losing their soul. But if greed ever became stronger than love, I wanted you to have the freedom to protect yourself without guilt. Beneath the letter was another envelope labeled Evidence. Inside were copies of emails, handwritten notes, and financial records. They showed that Melissa had quietly pressured Eleanor during her illness to sell family heirlooms and even asked whether the house could be transferred into her name before either of us had passed away. My stomach turned. Then I noticed the flash drive. A small note attached to it read, "If words aren't enough, watch this." I stared at the drive for several seconds before slipping it carefully into my pocket. Whatever Eleanor had recorded all those years ago. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The hardest truth was still waiting for me. I didn't watch the flash drive at the bank. Some moments deserve privacy, and whatever Eleanor had left for me wasn't meant to be viewed under fluorescent lights with strangers walking past the door. I drove home, locked the front door behind me, made a pot of coffee she would have called too strong, and sat down in the living room where we had spent countless evenings together. My computer recognized the flash drive immediately. There was only one file. Its name was simple: for Thomas. My finger hovered over the mouse before I finally clicked. The screen faded in, and there she was. Eleanor. She looked thinner than I remembered, but her smile was exactly the same. Warm, gentle, the kind of smile that had carried me through nearly 5 decades of marriage. "Hello, my love," she began. "If you're watching this, then I suppose my little plan worked." Despite everything, I smiled through my tears. "I know you're probably wondering why I hid all of this instead of telling you. The answer is simple. You always believed the best about people. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. But sometimes your kindness made. You ignored the warning signs that I couldn't ignore." She paused, taking a slow breath. "I never wanted you to spend my final months arguing with our daughter. I hoped she'd remember who she really was after I was gone. I hoped love would win over greed." She lowered her eyes for a moment. "If it didn't, then I needed to make sure you'd never become dependent on someone who valued your possessions more than your heart." The video ended with the words I had needed to hear more than anything. "I love you, Thomas. Live the rest of your life with peace, not bitterness. Justice doesn't need anger. It only needs truth." I sat there for a long time after the screen went black. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Over the following weeks, I quietly met with an attorney. I never mentioned the necklace to Melissa. I never confronted her about the letters or the video. There was no point. People rarely admit the truth when greed has convinced them they're entitled. Instead, I made careful decisions. I updated my will. The local children's hospice where Eleanor had volunteered for 15 years will receive a generous donation. Scholarships would be created in her name for nursing students. My faithful neighbor, Frank, who had helped me every winter without ever asking for anything in return, would receive my classic pickup truck that he'd always admired but never expected to own. The family photo albums, Eleanor's journals, and every sentimental keepsake would go to our granddaughter. Sophie, the only member of the family who still asked about her grandmother with genuine love instead of curiosity about money. Melissa's inheritance wasn't erased, but it was reduced to exactly what Eleanor had once written in her letter. Enough to remember she had parents who loved her, but not enough to reward what she chose to become. Several months later, Melissa called to announce a family dinner. "There are a few things we should probably discuss," she said cheerfully. I smiled quietly to myself. She believed the conversation would be about my estate. She had no idea that every decision had already been made, and that the necklace she sold for a vacation had changed all of our futures forever. The family dinner was held at Melissa's house on a warm Saturday evening. The table was beautifully set. The grandchildren laughed in the backyard, and everyone acted as though it were just another family gathering. But I noticed the little things. Melissa kept asking whether I was still comfortable living alone. Her husband casually mentioned that maintaining a large house at my age must be exhausting. Even my nephew joked that someone should help Grandpa manage his finances before the government does. Years ago, I would have dismissed those comments as harmless concern. Now, I heard them for what they really were. They weren't talking about my well-being. They were measuring my future. Dinner ended, coffee was served, and Melissa smiled across the table. "Dad," she said sweetly, "have you ever thought about updating your estate plans? You know, just to make things easier for everyone someday." I placed my coffee cup on its saucer and looked around the room. "I already have." The conversation stopped. I met with my attorney several weeks ago. Melissa's smile widened. Oh, That's wonderful. It is, I replied calmly. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the small velvet box, the same one that had once held Eleanor's necklace. Melissa's face lost its color. I thought you'd like to see something before we talk about anything else. I opened the box and lifted out the necklace. You got it back? She whispered. Yes. I didn't think. No, I interrupted gently. You didn't. I opened the tiny, heart-shaped medallion. There was something inside. Every eye at the table fixed on the necklace. I unfolded Eleanor's handwritten note and read only a few lines aloud. If this necklace reached you because it was sold, stolen, or treated as something worth only money, then I'm sorry. That means the person who carried it forgot what truly matters. The room became so quiet that I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Melissa stared at the table. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know. That's true, I said softly. You didn't know because you never cared enough to find out. I wasn't angry. I wasn't raising my voice. I was simply telling the truth. Then I handed everyone a sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter explaining how my estate would now be divided. Melissa opened hers first. She read it once, then again. Her hands began to shake. This can't be right. It is. You gave most of it away. I gave it where your mother and I believed it would do the most good. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. I made one mistake. I nodded slowly. No, Melissa, selling the necklace was one mistake. Treating your mother's memory like it had a price was another. Believing my love guaranteed an inheritance was the biggest mistake of all. No one argued. No one defended her, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. As I stood to leave, I fastened Eleanor's necklace around my own hand for a moment, just as I had done every Sunday since she passed. For the first time in years, it no longer felt like I was holding on to the past. It felt like Eleanor had kept one final promise. She had protected me, even after she was gone. And I finally understood what she meant all those years ago when she smiled, touched the little heart-shaped pendant, and whispered, one day, when the time is right, it'll tell its own story. I walked out into the evening with peace in my heart, not because I had won against my family, but because I had honored the woman who had loved me enough to leave behind something far more valuable than money. She left me the truth, and in the end, the truth became the quiet justice that changed every life at that table.